What happens when one man tries to watch all the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Well, we've arrived in 1984 now. We're just chugging along through this decade. And, this is the year that I think that things start to kind of become more 80s feeling. We've now completely gone away from that 70s feeling, and the influences of that decade are gone. And the things that make the 80s are going to really let themselves be known in this year. So let's get going and check it out and see what 1984 has to offer. Well, this year starts off in an appropriate way, as it's listed as releasing on January 1st, but it also says unknown, so it's possible that it just came out sometime in '84, and it's Screambook. It's shot on video and has a woman discovering that her husband has a horror comic and promptly throws it away. And then it's a number of segments, seemingly the stories that are in that comic book. Like in Creepshow. The first segment is called Family Reunion, and we find out that a family got their vast wealth from the passing of a great aunt, as 10 years earlier, they killed her and tossed her into the ocean and collected her fortune. Now they're having a reunion dedicated to Aunt Eleanor, and it's great because they're meant to be adults, but they're all kids in the roles. Like this dude is probably 13, and he's asked how his law business has been going.
And David, how's your law business doing?
One of them goes to her grave, like in Creepshow. But Aunt Eleanor wants revenge and rises from the dead, and everything has these comic book looking lit panels. Like in Creepshow. Like, it even ends with the revelation of the aunt, and she has everyone's heads on platters and cuts to comic book panels. It's no longer like Creepshow. It is Creepshow. This second segment is called Tommy, which is about a little boy who's been missing for 15 years, and he's apparently been locked up in this box, but now breaks free, and is some sort of creature. The third segment is Secret of the Bottle, and we have this scientist getting prank calls, and his coworker comes in, and it's hilarious because he's about 8 years old. And I love that they're both very obviously reading off of a cue card just off to the side here. And he sent a bottle of whiskey in the mail that turns him into a masked monster. The fourth segment is Ye Old Toy Shop, which has an Evil Dead reference, and a toy store with very professional signage. And this is the most surreal segment. Honestly, I'm not even sure what's supposed to be going on in this one. The final segment is called Worms, and it's just about a teacher who is haunted by a bunch of, you guessed it, worms. And if it seems like this is a movie made by a bunch of kids, well, it is. It was both written and directed by Joe Zasso. And considering that IMDb lists his year of birth as 1970, he made this film at the age of 13, assuming that date is accurate. He didn't really stick with directing though, and only made a few other films, but he then went into acting and modeling, and was given a nickname of the horror himbo. It's basically just made with family and friends using standard grade equipment, so don't expect top quality or even medium quality, and the sound is pretty rough. It didn't really get a release as such, but it looks like they did some local showings, and eventually Zasso uploaded the film himself onto his YouTube page.
What's going on? I don't know, but I intend to find out.
And I'm giving this one a 2.5. It's really rough quality-wise, but it has a certain charm that's entertaining. It brought back memories of a time where a bunch of kids in a camcorder could just make movies by using spaghetti to stand in for worms. Its horror cultural significance is just a 1 though, since it's pretty unheard of and didn't leave much of a dent on the SOV market. Should you watch it? Yeah, you should, just for the fun aspect of watching kids emulating their heroes.
I don't know. Worms, I get it now.
'84 is going to continue on an international trend and also a more obscure one, since on January 12th in Hong Kong we get Hocus Pocus, and not one with any Sanderson sisters. It starts weird with these masked men in a mountain setting doing a number of high-flying tricks and stunts, and it's a stage performance. Except our hero finds out that the troupe he performed with were actually ghosts, or just posing as them. The head of the theater should look familiar because he's Ching Ying Lam, and he's an HK film legend. He was in a number of old Bruce Lee films as a stunt fighter, but then started to get more substantial roles, and we last saw him back in Encounters of the Spooky Kind, but we'll be seeing plenty more of him later on when we get to the Mr. Vampire flicks. The members of the group have a fun rivalry and are constantly trying to scare each other with ghost stories, but there's one guy that they especially want to freak out. They pull a rather elaborate trick on him, making him think that he's haunted, but the troubles kick in when there's an actual mischievous ghost on hand who doesn't like being mocked and decides to play some pranks of his own. He even starts getting involved in their shows and getting them into trouble, although they can't see him. Soon enough, they figure out what's going on and have to work together to stop his shenanigans. And this is another entry of the Hong Kong horror comedy genre that was picking up steam around this time, that was kicked off by Sammo Hung, and he's a producer on this one as well. It was directed by Yuen Sang Chin, most known for acting, but he did direct 4 films, of which this was the second. He even appears in it, playing the silly ghost, when he's not possessing people, that is. And by the way, not sure if you're aware of this, but this movie lets us know that a cure for possession is to have a little baby pee on your head. And it works perfectly, which makes me wonder why Marin and Karras went through all of that rigmarole. Wasted all of that praying and holy water and risking of lives when just a little stream of toddler pee would have done it. There were a number of this type of film from around this time frame, and even though this would blend in with a number of them, it's generally thought that this is the film that led Lam to his role in the Mr. Vampire flicks. And I'll go with a 3 here. It's a fun watch with enough silliness that I had a good time watching it, but I'll also likely not be quick to watch it again because it's mostly been done before. Its HCS is just a 1 though, since it's more obscure over here, and even if its home country sort of blended in with some of the others like it. Should you watch it? If you enjoy the Mr. Vampire flicks, you'll like this. It's not as good, but it has that same flavor. We're in the US for the first time in '84, and our first entry over here came on January 20th, and let's grab a hold of the power. We have a college course where they're talking about an ancient demon named Desticatl, and the prof seems to have an idol of it with him, which causes a class clown to have a nosebleed. He's confronted by a colleague who seems aware that he's dipping into things that he shouldn't, but he ain't listening, because he's taken over by the power, and it kills him. Francis is able to retrieve the idol and goes off to consult a native shaman who tells him to get rid of it, but that night he's taken over by the demon's sway, which leads to a murder and then a meltdown. Meanwhile, there's a couple of students, and one of them has the idol, and they sneak into the graveyard at night with a squeegee board. That leads to some death as well, but just when you think that you've pegged down our characters, we're also introduced to a reporter, and then a guy named Jerry, who's her boyfriend. And I should point out that this is almost 30 minutes in. We're like a third of the way into this movie, and so far it's just ping-ponged from character to character as they get the idol and then die, like some sort of high-stakes Brady Bunch in Hawaii episode. And, oh, look, we have our standard 80s guy in a generic sports-looking shirt with a random number on it. After some more bad omens, the kids turn the little fella, which sort of looks like that little doll that Pee-wee squishes, over to the reporter. Jerry takes an interest in it, and of course, starts to become corrupted, and I guess turned into a pig man thing. And kinda Harmar superstar. And as he starts down that murderous path, will he escape the same fate as those who came before him? And this one was co-directed by Stephen Carpenter and Jeffrey Obrow, and they're a team that we've seen before. Their first film together was in 1982 with The Dorm That Dripped Blood, and they'll work together later on to do The Kindred as well. Together, they both wrote the film, directed, as well as edited, while Obrow also produced and Carpenter also served as the DP. They were able to use the fact that The Dorm That Dripped Blood, made as a student project, went on to a big profit and raised around $350K to make this one. Originally, it was titled Evil Passage, or possibly The Intruder, but it was changed to The Power for distribution, but was also called Evil Power and Evil Passage elsewhere. It was also a nice-sized hit and brought in almost $1 million in a limited release, even though it never really gained that necessary cult status for longevity. And let's give this a 3. It starts off strong, but then doesn't do much for a while, but the ending is pretty bonkers, and a good time with wacky transformation stuff. Its significance is only a 1.5 though, since it's a little known and made a small splash when it came out, but became more obscure as time went on, and never really impacted the genre. Should you watch it? I think yeah, get yourself a little power. One week later, on January 27th, there was a premiere in Albuquerque for a film that would get a limited release a little later in March, and it's Soul Survivor. We meet a woman named Carla who has a dream about a plane crash and tries to warn someone about it, but it turns out to be a premonition, and the flight goes down. There's one survivor, a TV producer named Denise, and she recovers, flirting with her hunky doctor. Once she's released, though, she starts seeing things and has a near miss with a truck almost hitting her. Turns out that the commercial that she's producing features Carla in it, as she's an aging actress, and she starts dating that doc. He tells her that the other day a body went missing from the hospital morgue and then reappeared a half hour later, and the description sounds like the girl that Denise saw. She continues to have odd encounters with people that seem to be in a trance, and Carla is freaked out by her and tries to warn her about grave circumstances stemming from surviving the crash. The doc thinks that she's suffering from survivor's syndrome, and we get an appearance by Brinke Stevens, sans shirt of course. Things take a turn when Denise goes to visit her friend Christy, and she falls asleep on her couch while someone breaks in and kills her pal in the pool. But is she going crazy? Or is something supernatural happening after all? This one was written and directed by Tom Eberhard, and it was his first full-length feature, but we'll see him a little later this year as well with the awesome Night of the Comet. Even though it said that the story is based on Carnival of Souls, and it does bear some similarities, it's also quite different. And it seems as if the makers of Final Destination may have seen this as well, since some of the plot points seem to directly be referenced. The budget that's listed online is around $350,000, or ironically the same amount as is said for The Power. That was low enough that they had to shoot the film guerrilla style, often having no permits for their exterior shoots. It only managed to get a limited run, and it's not really said what the box office was, but it's likely it didn't make too much. But it was released on home video in 1985, where it would have a nice cult following. And I'll go 3.5 on this one. It's a good time with a nice amount of atmosphere. It's maybe a touch slow at times, but the vibes it's giving make up for it. The HCS is just a 1.5 though, since it's not that well known, although it was a common sight in video stores back in the day, even if it's never really taken off. Should you watch it? You should. This is worth a look. We're headed back to international grounds for a film that debuted in France on February 8th. And as far as I can tell, it didn't get a run in the US, and it's Clash. Not The Clash, sorry to train in vain. There's this woman and she's making a drop off to a couple of guys out in the middle of nowhere, and it's said that there's 5 million francs at stake. The cops are on their trail as they split up and make their way to the hideout. She takes the bus, but on the way sees some strange things. But when she finally gets there, it's just an abandoned warehouse with dust and cobwebs everywhere. Things get complicated when there's someone else there with a big dog, and then things move on their own, and a strange little girl shows up. It's not all bad though, because there's a kitten on hand, and he's the chillest cat in movies. Like, look at this guy, just letting himself get all scooped up. The loneliness and the pressure start to build up though, and when her associates arrive, it's not clear if they do, or if this is all in her head. Especially once the violence starts. And this slow burn flick is from Raphael Delpard, who both wrote and directed, who we've covered once before back in 1980 with Night of Death, which was a surprisingly charming story, and this one has a very different feel. That one had an element of camp running through it with a variety of zany characters, but this is far more stripped down, with most of the film being Martine on her own. It's certainly dipping more into the realm of art film, and even though it never feels completely surreal, it's also keeping you on your toes about what is actually reality. And I'll go 3.5 with this one as well. It's not what I was expecting, and it definitely appeals to the side of me that likes artsy-fartsy stuff, but it's giving you such a great atmosphere and striking visuals that it's hard not to enjoy. Its horror-cultural significance is just a 1 though, since it's not spoken of at all and maybe means more in France, but just didn't have any sort of note here in the States. Should you watch it? Yes, although be warned that it's a particularly dense and odd film. This next one is back in the US and could probably have been back in the 83 episode since it had a screening on December 16th, 83, but had another one in Mississippi on February 13th and had a wider release in 85, and it's Boggy Creek 2, The Legend Continues. A voiceover tells us that we're in the swamps in Texarkana and we're told the legend of the hairy man and get a shot of one heading towards the river. After a couple of sightings of the big fella, a professor of anthropology is called in to investigate. He takes along a couple of his students and heads on down to find out the scoop, and they go deep into the farmland. Some of the locals they encounter scoff at the idea of the hairy man, but he tells a story of a farmer who meets up with the beast in a pretty hilarious way. But that's not the only trouble, since there's also wild dog attacks. He tells another story about a child version of the creature, and my favorite part is this guy who gets a flat tire and is attacked by the beast, but then they say that he went into a coma and never woke up. So, like, how did they even know what happened? Like, he couldn't tell anyone that he saw a Bigfoot, so why did Lockhart tell this story as if that's what happened? But then our crew encounters the dude themselves, narrowly escaping before hearing yet another tale of a guy who came face to face with the foot while in the outhouse and ends up getting a leg load of poop for it. I guess I should mention that Lockhart is played by Charles B. Pierce, and he also wrote and directed the movie. Not only did he previously direct The Town That Dreaded Sundown, also set in Texarkana, but he did the original Legend of Boggy Creek. And that's where this one's story gets interesting. After that film was a nice-sized hit, they went ahead with making a sequel, Return to Boggy Creek, although Pierce wasn't involved in that one in any way. He was unhappy with the way that it turned out and felt like he had his own story to tell and decided to make his own sequel, and purposely titled it Part 2 in order to cement the fact that Return is not the true follow-up. Funnily enough, Pierce himself ended up quite unhappy with this one, stating that he considered it his worst film. Critics agreed since the reviews were mostly negative, and it would end up on a number of worst ever lists, and even earned itself some ridicule on Mystery Science Theater 3000. And yeah, it's a slog, it's a 2. Pierce just has no screen presence, and the only bright spots are the creature attacks, and they're just too few and far between. The HCS is the same since it did get some notoriety and is a sequel to the successful film, but it's still not that well known and doesn't feature any horror names. Should you watch it, you can jump this creek and keep on moving. Let's go back over the ocean to Italy now for February 15th and check out a little number called The Wild Beasts. It starts off at a zoo with a blind guy recording animal noises, and his dog drinks some of that animal's water. They then trank a tiger, and I guess they really did it because it convulses. And I suppose it's the animal's actual reaction. Then the animals start to go mad as a pack of rats attacks a couple in a car, and an elephant breaks out of its pen and causes an electrical short that opens all of the cages. So they call in the zoo docs to figure out what to do. The big cats get out and started chomping, and we also meet an odd little girl.
Susie is daughter of Laura. They say Laura is mother of Susie. Susie, although abandoned, is worried about Laura.
But then even that seeing eye dog is out for blood. Soon, animals are loose all over the city and going on a rampage, and when they test their blood, they find a high level of acidity, and it turns out that the animals are all hopped up on PCP. All of the people then have to avoid a random assortment of wild beasts in the urban jungle while the authorities figure out how to try to counteract its effects. And meanwhile, there's a pretty hilarious bit with a woman who is chased by one of the cats and gets in her car to drive away, but it's a cheetah, so it just keeps up with her until she runs off the road. There's even a polar bear at one point, and remember what they say if you see a bear. If it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's polar, oh, you are so screwed. And this zoo is an Italian film, both written and directed by Franco E. Prosperi, and it's his first appearance on the project since it was the first movie he had directed since 1975. He'd only done 8 movies in total, and this was his final work, and oddly, was his only narrative film. All of his other works were Mondo-style documentary films. Of course, since they shot with actual animals, there were reports of problems on set, including an elephant stepping directly on the director's foot, a tiger getting loose and hiding out in a train station, and an actor nearly getting decapitated when that polar bear took a swing at him. The reviews for the film weren't great, and it didn't turn into much of a hit, although it did win grand prize at a French film festival, so it at least had that going for it. And I'll go 2.5 with this one. It's not terrible, but there's just not much to it. Like, with an assortment of crazy animal attacks, this seemed like it could be a bunch more fun, but sadly, I was wrong. The HCS is just a 1 because it's also mostly unknown and doesn't have any known faces in it, becoming a very under-the-radar little flick. Should you watch it? I mean, it's not the worst thing, but it's not essential at all.
What are you doing, Susie?
It's the dying swan.
We're staying in international waters and going to Spain now, and kids, cover your eyes because on March 5th, it's Night Has 1,000 Desires. It starts with some sort of lounge act where a man puts his assistant into some sort of trance, and then she's able to read his thoughts from across the room. Like, he goes around to various audience members and they'll give him objects, and she'll have to determine what the objects are and what they say on them. And they're also involved romantically. Irina gets a death threat and soon starts having bad nightmares, and she's also played by Lena Romay, who we last saw in Diamonds of Kilimanjaro, but also in Revenge of the House of Usher, Mansion of the Living Dead, Oasis of the Zombies, Sex is Crazy, and White Cannibal Queen. Her dreams get more and more surreal, blending into reality, but one of the guys who attended the show goes into her bed, only for Irina to appear there with him. But her dreams appear to be coming true as people start getting killed. Things get stranger when she goes off to another group's room to hang out and smoke pot, but the movie treats it like a nightmare, so she goes to see a psychiatrist, trying to figure out what the hell is going on? And if she finds out, I hope she'll tell me. And considering that Lina Romay is here, you can be sure that it was also written and directed by Jess Franco, considering that most of her films were. This is officially the 9th film that we've featured from Franco here on the project, and there's no doubt that we'll run into him again, likely soon. Most of his films in this era were more in the realm of the adult, and this one has elements of that, even if it's not a hardcore flick. But it does get rather explicit. During this time frame, Franco was associated with a company called Golden Film, and he would end up making around 20 films with them, many in the same locations with the same cast, shot back to back. Unlike some other of his films, this block allowed him complete creative control, done in the manner of his choice. The director referred to this as one of his black films, which was his term for the flicks that he did that he was trying to evoke a feeling of classic film noir, and said it was influenced by The Night Has 1,000 Eyes, a film from 1948. It's one of his more praised works due to the oddly hypnotic filming style, gorgeous location shoots, and one hell of a committed performance by Romay, who goes completely off the deep end in a pretty tough role to play, let alone to do it naked around 80% of the time. And I'm off and on with Franco, but I like this, and I'm giving it a 3. It's a bit lackadaisical at times, but it's really pretty and moody and does some good stuff. The HCS is another 1 since it's basically completely unheard of, and even though it's a Franco film, he has like over 200 films, so it's not like it stands out. Should you watch it? Yeah, I'd give this night a visit. Our final film of this block is the highest profile of the bunch, and it debuted on March 9th, and it's time for Stephen King's Children of the Corn. We're in a small rural town in Nebraska 3 years ago, and one day this group of kids, including creepy Malachi, led by man-child Isaac, poison part of the town and then just straight up murder the rest. All of the kids in the town kill the adults, and then 3 years pass, and there's a young couple on a trip, and this guy is either young or, 30-something, and his wife is Sarah Connor. Meanwhile, in the town, the kids are in control, with Isaac in charge, but a young boy named Joseph tries to get away. He's caught before he gets too far and is stabbed, and then gets run over by Vicky and Bert. They try to find some help, but then weird things start to happen, and it looks like there might be something in the corn, as all the children worship what they call He Who Walks Behind the Rose. Our couple finds their way into the town and start to uncover the mystery of what went on there, encountering a couple of kids that aren't corrupted by Isaac's influence. But then, when Vicky gets caught, it's up to Bert to save the day and the corn, all while having Outlander yelled at him approximately 5,000 times.
Outlander! 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 Outlander!
Of course, this is another Stephen King adaptation, one of many from the 80s, and this is a fleshing out of a short story from 1977. The original is only 16 pages long, so as you can imagine, the film version is quite a bit different than the story, even if the core elements are all there. It's rumored that the film was originally offered to Sam Raimi to direct, but he wanted more prep time than they were willing to give, and it was also put up to Tommy Lee Wallace, but he said no. The gig was then given to Fritz Kirsch, and it was his first directing job. Probably his most well-known, but he'd also do the silly action flick Tough Turf, and then the fantasy film Gore. They hired King himself to do the first draft of the script, but the studio didn't like it, and felt it was too low-key, and had too fractured of a structure, so they brought in George Goldsmith to write it, and he gave them more of the popcorn film that they were looking for. The budget was pretty low, and it's said to be just under $1 million, and even though the reviews were soft overall, it was a nice-sized hit. It would go on to earn close to $15 million and soon became a cult classic on VHS and cable. There would then be a large roster of sequels, some of which would feature early roles for Charlize Theron and Naomi Watts, most of them going straight to video. There'd also be 2 remakes, or reboots, or whatever you want to call them, and one was directed by Donald Borchers, this film's producer. And this may be controversial, but I don't enjoy this as much as others. It's just a 3 for me. Like, I enjoy watching it enough, but it's not one that I look forward to rewatching or think about much at all. It's the kind of movie that's good while it's on, but it just doesn't stay with you at all. Its horror cultural significance is a 4 though, since it was a nice hit, and most horror fans have seen this. Plus, it's part of King's works and spawned a long-running franchise. Should you watch it? Sure. I mean, if anything, it'll make you wary of cornfields, although you probably already were.
He wants you too, Malachi. He wants you too.
So there you have it, kicking off 1984. And my favorite one of this block, I'm going to have to go with Soul Survivor. Yeah, I mean, it was probably the coolest little surprise. It's moody, atmospheric, and kind of fun and interesting. That's my favorite here. But let me know which of these is your favorite down below. I'd like to hear that. What's your favorite one of this block? Which of these have you seen? Which of these have you not seen? Which of these would you now like to see? I want to hear all of that right down below in the comments. Also, if you like this video, hit that like button. If you like what you see on the channel, hit that subscribe button and hit the bell to get notified of future releases. And also check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, where you can help support this project, and I would appreciate that. And yeah, we've kicked it off 1984, but we've got a lot more to go in this year. So let's keep on chugging along right here on the 80s Project.